You may have heard about this news recently, a settlement with the National Association of Realtors that could change the way buyers and sellers pay commissions to real estate agents. And that could mean big savings for homeowners. To talk about that, let's bring in our real estate expert, Suzanne Seini from Innovate Realty. Thanks for joining us again, Suzanne. Good to see you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
How does buying a home work now?
So currently you have a listing agent that will meet with their seller and basically come up with the amount that they will, that the seller will offer for commission. So that includes their commission, and then that also includes the buyer's agent commission. So usually that's around 5 to 6%. And then that fee right now is published for all buyers agents to see online, so that they know exactly what's being offered to them by the seller.
So let me be sure I understand this. So where agents have gotten 5 to 6%, what would they actually be getting now in a negotiated sort of fee?
So usually that's divided between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So let's say it's 5%. The listing agent and the buyer's agent will both receive 2.5% for that transaction.
Now that's a big change, huh?
So that's the current state. What this new ruling says is basically we need more transparency around commissions, because the buyers didn't necessarily know or understand what their real estate agents were being paid or how they were being paid. So now, instead of the listing agent just handling all of that with the seller and the buyer not necessarily being involved there, commissions could potentially be negotiated with the buyer as well. They will be a little bit more looped into the process.
Yeah, I understand just a little bit of this. I sold a house last year, and I understand just a teeny tiny little bit about these fees. But how does this radically change the landscape? Is it just simply transparency? Is that just simply it?
It is around transparency. So as I mentioned previously, that number was shown to the buyer's agent only of what was being offered by the seller to sell the home, basically, and bring buyers to the home. So now potentially a buyer's agent may have to, depending on what the seller wants to offer, the lawsuit really was surrounding, being almost assumed that commission was 2.5 for the listing agent and 2.5 for the buyer's agent. Now, potentially that can be negotiated. It always could be, but I think, again, there's more transparency to it, and the buyer is now in the know as well. So say, for example, a seller says, I only want to offer a total of 3%. And a listing agent says, well, that's my fee. So that doesn't include the buyer's agent fee. So now potentially that buyer's agent may have to go back to their buyer and negotiate their commission with that buyer, which is a very big change historically, because usually you don't negotiate the commission with the buyer, but it's not that you can't. So I think, again, this has always been the case. It's just been very standard to do things the way we have been doing them for quite some time. And now we might potentially see some changes there.
Well, let me kind of pose a compound question here. First of all, practically speaking, will this make buying and selling less expensive? And also, how are agents feeling about this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of concern only because, there's headlines out there, right? And the headlines can be a little misleading. So one of the big headlines I've heard quite a bit is no more 6% commission, right? But that's actually not the case. So I think when you actually drill down into this, it really is business as how we should be doing business. Commissions are always negotiable. They always have been. But maybe agents need to have a little more of a tough conversation with their buyers where potentially, again, buyers usually don't pay for their agent's commission. So that could affect affordability if the buyer, doesn't necessarily have all of the funds that they need to. But at the end of the day, everything is negotiable. So when you're putting out your offer, you should make sure that that offer makes sense. You should be negotiating your commissions with that offer, and you should be transparent with everyone throughout the process.
More and more we tend to try to do things ourselves. Don't know how smart that is, but more and more we try to do things ourselves. So what risks do buyers take if they choose to represent themselves?
That's a great question. I mean, you just talked about it when it comes to doing your taxes yourself, right? And it's like you could do your taxes yourself, but how is that actually going to look in the long run? And it's the same thing with attorneys and real estate agents. You could definitely represent yourself, but you're really opening yourself up for a ton of risk, potentially litigation. There's a lot of paperwork involved in a real estate transaction. There's a lot of disclosures, but for a reason. The reason California does what they do is because they're really trying to protect the buyer and seller, of course. And if the buyer or seller doesn't have that protection and they're just, closing up a transaction because they think they can, they're opening themselves up to a lot of risk.
It is definitely a big process. It is a big process. All right. Suzanne Seini, thanks so much for joining us again. I'm sure we'll see you again soon.